AITA and my fiancée got me paying for her entire family. Is this getting out of hand? She took my money for her uncle's dubious business idea without even asking. I'm 26, and I'd say I'm pretty fortunate in life. I've worked my ass off to get where I am today, and now I'm earning a salary that puts me in a financial position most people my age aren't in yet. My fiancée, on the other hand, is 24 and comes from a very different financial background. She's kind, funny, and the most compassionate person I've ever met, which is part of why I fell for her so hard. We've been together for 3 years, engaged for a few months, and for the most part, it's been great. But there's this massive issue that's been slowly eating away at me, and I'm honestly not sure how much longer I can take it. It all started small, you know, the usual stuff when you're dating someone from a different financial situation. I paid for most of our dates, which I didn't mind at all. She was upfront from the beginning that her family wasn't well off, and I didn't hold that against her. In fact, I admired how close-knit they seemed to be. Her parents worked hard to provide for her and her siblings, and she always talked about how much they sacrificed for her growing up. It was one of the things that made me love her even more, her deep appreciation for family. At first, the financial disparity between us didn't bother me. I'd pick up the tab when we went out, buy her little gifts, help her with gas money now and then. She was always so grateful, and I loved seeing her smile. But as our relationship progressed, it became clear that her family's struggles weren't just occasional, they were constant. And somehow, over time, I became the go-to solution for every single one of their problems. The first time I noticed this was about a year into our relationship. Her younger brother was graduating high school, and her parents couldn't afford to throw him the kind of party they thought he deserved. My fiancée asked me if I could help out with the costs. She made it sound like she just needed a little bit to make it special, maybe some decorations, a cake, that sort of thing. I figured, why not, it's her brother, and I wanted to support her family. But a little help quickly turned into me covering everything. The venue, the catering, the DJ. By the time it was over, I'd spent thousands of dollars. It stung a little, but seeing how happy her family was made it seem worth it. Her parents were effusive with their thanks, her brother was over the moon, and my fiancée couldn't stop talking about how amazing I was. I told myself it was a one-time thing, a special occasion. Boy, was I wrong. After that, the requests started to come more frequently. At first, it was little things. Her mom needed help with groceries, her dad's car broke down and they couldn't afford the repairs, her sister needed money for textbooks. None of these were huge asks on their own, but they started adding up. And every time, my fiancée would frame it as, they're in a tough spot right now, and you're in such a good position to help. It's not a big deal for you, right? Then came the bigger asks. Her cousin needed bail money after getting into some legal trouble. Her aunt's house was at risk of foreclosure, and they needed help catching up on payments. Her dad wanted to start a side hustle and asked if I could invest in his business. Each time, the amount they were asking for grew larger, and my fiancée would get more insistent. If I hesitated or said no, she'd guilt-trip me, saying things like, "This is what being part of a family means," or, "If you really loved me, you'd want to help the people I care about." The breaking point came last week. Her cousin, someone I've met maybe twice, had a medical emergency and needed a large sum of money for hospital bills. It was a significant amount, and I was already feeling the financial strain from all the other things I'd covered for her family. I told her I couldn't do it this time, and that's when things got ugly. She called me selfish, accused me of not caring about her or her family, and said I was putting money over love. Her exact words were, "If you truly loved me, you wouldn't even hesitate." Her mom chimed in, too, texting me about how I was letting the family down and how a real man steps up when his family needs him. I stood my ground, but it left a bad taste in my mouth. Just a few days after that, her uncle, someone I've never even met, reached out to me directly. He said he'd heard about how generous I am and wanted to know if I could help fund a business idea he had. He didn't even try to sugarcoat it, he straight up asked for a 5-figure loan. When I told my fiancée about it, she acted like it was no big deal. "Why not?" she said. "You've got the money," as if that was supposed to make it okay. I said no, again, And this time her reaction was even worse. She accused me of not understanding what it's like to struggle and said I was acting privileged. She went on this whole rant about how her family has always had to rely on each other to get by and how I just didn't get it because I've never been in their shoes. I tried to explain that it's not about the money, it's about the fact that I feel like I'm being taken advantage of. But she didn't want to hear it. To her, it was black and white. If I loved her, I'd help her family, no questions asked. And it's not just the big things, either. Her family now expects me to cover pretty much everything. When we go on vacation, I'm the one footing the bill for the hotel, the flights, the meals. When we go out to dinner, her siblings just assume I'll pick up the tab. Even her friends have started making comments about how lucky she is to have someone who takes care of her. I feel like I've gone from being her partner to being her family's ATM, and the worst part is, I don't think she even sees the problem. Every time I try to talk to her about it, she turns it around on me, making me feel like I'm the bad guy for wanting to set boundaries. She say things like, "This is just what family does," or, "It's not a big deal for you, so why are you making it one?" It's like she doesn't care how this is affecting me as long as her family gets what they want. Everything's fine. I love her, I really do, but I'm starting to wonder if this is what my life will look like if we get married. Will I ever be able to say no without being made out to be the villain? Will I spend the rest of my life funding every emergency, every vacation, every business idea? I don't know if I can do this forever, but I also don't know how to bring it up without completely blowing up our relationship. I'm at a loss. Has anyone else been in a situation like this? How do you navigate financial boundaries in a relationship where the power dynamic is so lopsided? Am I being unreasonable for wanting to draw a line? Or is this just part of being with someone from a different financial background? Update 1. Things between my fiancée and me had been tense ever since the argument about her family's constant financial requests. I was trying to move past it, trying to refocus on the good parts of our relationship, but deep down, I was still simmering. I didn't like the person I was becoming, distrustful, anxious, second-guessing every text she got from her family because I was sure it would lead to another ask. But she had started acting oddly upbeat, almost as if she thought the storm had passed. That should have tipped me off. One evening, she came home from work practically glowing. She told me she had a surprise for me. Immediately, my mind raced with possibilities. Maybe she'd planned something romantic to ease the tension, a weekend getaway, a nice dinner. I wanted to believe she'd been reflecting on everything we'd gone through and was trying to make things right. For the first time in weeks, I let myself feel hopeful. When I asked what the surprise was, she said she had figured out a way to increase our money. That phrasing alone made my stomach tighten a bit. My first thought was that she might have gotten into investing, maybe bought some stocks or cryptocurrency without consulting me. That would have been a conversation in itself, but it was the confidence in her voice that made me curious. I asked her how she planned to increase our money, and that's when my world tilted on its axis. She looked so proud of herself as she told me. She said she'd given a substantial sum of my money to her uncle to fund his business idea. My mind blanked for a second. Surely, I'd misheard her. But no, she said it so matter-of-factly, like it was the most logical and exciting thing in the world. Her uncle had promised that if his business succeeded, he would double the investment and give it back to us. She was thrilled, grinning ear to ear, as she explained the opportunity. I didn't feel excitement. I felt every ounce of blood drain from my face as the gravity of what she'd just admitted sank in. She had taken my money without asking me and given it to someone I barely knew for a business idea I hadn't even heard about. It wasn't a small sum, either. She threw out a number, and my heart dropped. It was tens of thousands of dollars. Not pocket change, not money I wouldn't miss. It was a significant chunk of my savings, money I'd worked years to earn and had plans for. The worst part was how oblivious she seemed to the magnitude of what she'd done. She kept going on about how her uncle had assured her this was a sure thing. He'd pitched it as some kind of genius idea, something about a product he was developing that was going to revolutionize a niche market. She was convinced this was going to set us up financially for years to come. She kept saying things like, "It's an investment in our future, and you'll thank me when we're sitting on double what we started with." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She had no background in finance, no understanding of business. She hadn't done any due diligence, hadn't asked for a business plan or proof of concept. She'd just handed over my money because her uncle had promised her it would work out. And this wasn't some seasoned entrepreneur with a track record of success. This was a man I'd never even met until he texted me out of the blue to ask for money. The betrayal hit me like a freight train. It wasn't just about the money, although that was a huge part of it. It was the principle. She had crossed a boundary I didn't even know I needed to set. She had made a monumental financial decision without consulting me, without even thinking it was necessary to get my input. It didn't matter that it was my money. It didn't even seem to occur to her that this was something we should have discussed. As she kept talking, I felt a storm of emotions brewing inside me. Anger, disbelief, sadness, betrayal, it was all tangled together. I kept replaying everything that had led to this moment. All the times she'd pressured me to give money to her family, all the times I'd caved to keep the peace. This was the culmination of it all. She'd become so comfortable with me footing the bill for everything that she didn't even see this as a violation of trust. To her, it was just another way I was helping her family. I didn't say much as she rambled on about how excited her uncle was and how this was going to be a game changer for us. I couldn't. I was too stunned. I wanted to ask her so many questions: how she thought this was okay, why she didn't come to me first, what she would have done if I'd said no, but I couldn't get the words out. Eventually, she must have noticed my silence because she stopped mid-sentence and asked if I was mad. Mad didn't even begin to cover it. I was furious, heartbroken, and completely at a loss for what to do next. I felt like I didn't even know the person standing in front of me. I couldn't stop thinking about how easily she'd disregarded my boundaries, how little she seemed to respect the work I'd put into building my financial stability. And for what? A half-baked business idea from a man neither of us truly knew. The next day, I started doing some research on her uncle. It didn't take long to uncover some red flags. He'd had a string of failed business ventures over the years, none of which had ever taken off. He had a reputation for being overly optimistic, to the point of delusion, and there were even whispers about him owing money to other family members. The more I dug, the worse it got. This wasn't just a bad investment, it was a disaster waiting to happen. I'm at a crossroads now. I love her, but this feels like a betrayal I can't ignore. It's not just about the money, it's about trust, respect, and partnership. If she doesn't see the problem with what she did, how can I ever feel secure in this relationship? How can I marry someone who thinks it's okay to gamble with our future without even talking to me first? Update 2. A few weeks after the incident with the money and her uncle's business idea, things between my fiancée and me had settled somewhat. Or at least, it felt like we were in a weird, fragile truce. I was still grappling with the betrayal of trust, but she seemed to have moved on, acting as though everything was fine. There were no apologies, no discussions about what had happened, just her sunny demeanor and a lot of avoidance. Then one evening, she told me her family wanted to go out for dinner together and insisted that I join them. She said her uncle was especially looking forward to meeting me properly and talking more about his business. The idea of sitting across from the man who had taken a significant chunk of my savings without any real accountability didn't exactly thrill me. But I also didn't want to seem petty or standoffish. Plus, I thought maybe this would be an opportunity to clear the air, to finally talk about what happened. So, I agreed. We went to a fairly upscale restaurant, not the kind of place I would have expected her family to choose, considering their financial situation. When we arrived, everyone was already seated. Her parents, her siblings, a couple of cousins, and, of course, the infamous uncle. The atmosphere was surprisingly lively. They were laughing, chatting, and seemed genuinely happy to see me. For a moment, I let my guard down. Maybe this wasn't going to be so bad. The conversation started light and casual. Her dad talked about a fishing trip he wanted to take. Her mom gushed about some home renovation shows she'd been binge-watching. The uncle, who had always been a bit of a mystery to me, was surprisingly charming. He told stories about his adventurous past, most of which seemed embellished but entertaining nonetheless. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could actually relax. The tension I'd been carrying since the money incident seemed to dissipate, and I even found myself laughing along with them. The food was fantastic, and everyone ordered generously. Appetizers, entrees, Desserts, drinks, no one held back. Plates piled up on the table as we all indulged. It felt good, in a way, to let go of the stress and just enjoy the moment. I was almost beginning to think I had misjudged them, that maybe I'd been too harsh in my assumptions about their intentions. Then the check came. It was placed in the middle of the table, and suddenly, the lively chatter died down. There was an awkward pause as everyone seemed to be waiting for someone else to make the first move. I didn't touch it, curious to see what would happen. After a beat, her mom said something about how it was such a big check and how it had been such a wonderful treat. Her dad chimed in, saying it had been great to all come together like this and that they were so glad I could join. Then, like clockwork, the spotlight turned to me. One of her cousins, someone I'd barely spoken to before that night, joked that I should cover the bill since it's just a drop in the bucket for someone like you. Everyone laughed, including my fiancée, who didn't even glance in my direction. Her uncle, the man who had taken my money for his business venture, nodded along and said something about how I was so generous and how they were lucky to have me in the family. Then her mom, with an almost casual air, suggested that I take care of it since the total was probably a bit much for anyone else at the table. It wasn't a direct demand, but the implication was clear. They expected me to pay for everyone. I sat there, stunned. The audacity was mind-boggling. I couldn't believe they were so comfortable joking about me being their financial safety net, especially after everything that had happened. And then, as if to drive the point home, one of her siblings quipped, "Well, you're basically like our bank, right?" Everyone burst into laughter again. Everyone except me. I stayed calm, but inside, something snapped. I realized in that moment that this wasn't a misunderstanding or a one-off incident. This was how they saw me, not as a person, not as a future son-in-law, but as a resource, a tool to make their lives easier. And my fiancée. She was just sitting there, laughing along, completely unfazed. So, I did something I don't think they expected. I leaned back in my chair, taking my time, letting the weight of the silence settle over the table. With a calm but deliberate tone, I reminded them all that her uncle had already taken a significant sum of my money for his business idea. I was careful with my words, measured and precise, as I mentioned the promises he'd made not just to me, but in front of my fiancé about how this venture would yield returns, even double the original investment. Then, keeping my gaze firmly fixed on him, I suggested that since he was sitting right there, and since his business was such a promising opportunity, perhaps he could cover the bill with the money he'd been planning to pay back to me. The effect was immediate and undeniable. The room went dead silent, the kind of silence that stretches on and grows heavy, pressing down on everyone present. Her uncle froze for a moment, visibly taken aback, and then began to stammer something incoherent about how the business was still in its early stages. He was trying to explain, but the words didn't land. They just stumbled out, half-formed, as he desperately looked for a way to salvage the situation. His voice wavered, lacking the same confidence he'd had when pitching his idea weeks earlier. I noticed how he avoided eye contact, suddenly very interested in the remnants of food on his plate, his hands fiddling with the edge of his napkin like it might offer him an escape route. Across the table, the discomfort was palpable. Her mom shifted in her seat, her eyes darting between me and her husband, as though silently pleading for someone to intervene. Her dad cleared his throat but said nothing, choosing instead to focus on folding and refolding his napkin with a level of intensity normally reserved for brain surgery. Her siblings, who had been so quick to laugh and joke moments ago, were now uncharacteristically quiet, their earlier bravado melting into awkward fidgeting. Even my fiancée, who up until this point had seemed completely unfazed by the direction of the conversation, sat stiffly, her face unreadable. I didn't let up. If they wanted to treat me like a bank, then I was going to remind them exactly how banks operate. I told them, still in that same calm tone, that banks don't just hand out money with no strings attached, they charge interest. And if they really wanted to see me as their financial safety net, then it was time to reevaluate what that meant. I began to list, in rough numbers, the amounts I'd given over the past few years. It started small: the groceries I'd covered for her parents, the repairs I'd paid for on her dad's car. Then came the bigger things: the high school graduation party for her brother, the vacations, the countless dinners where I'd picked up the tab without so much as a thank you. Each example rolled off my tongue with the precision of someone who'd been keeping track, even if only subconsciously, and the cumulative total was staggering, even to me. I could see the realization washing over them like a cold tide, their expressions shifting from discomfort to something closer to shame or perhaps annoyance that I was daring to point it out. I reminded them that this wasn't the first time I'd been put on the spot to cover something, and it likely wouldn't be the last if I didn't draw the line here. And I made it abundantly clear, without raising my voice or losing my composure, that I wasn't doing it anymore. Finally, I said I would pay for my own meal and my fiancee's, but that was it. I wasn't going to be guilt-tripped or joked into covering everyone else's tab. Then I pulled out my card, flagged the waiter, and paid for the two of us. The rest of the family sat there, stunned, as the waiter split the bill and handed them the remaining balance. As I stood up to leave, I took my fiancee's hand and said we were going. She didn't protest, didn't try to argue, she just followed me out, her face a mix of confusion and mild embarrassment. She didn't seem particularly bothered, though. After all, her meal was covered. Whatever the rest of her family decided to do with the bill wasn't her concern. When we got to the car, she was oddly quiet. Maybe she finally realized the weight of what had just happened. Or maybe she was simply annoyed that the evening hadn't gone the way she'd hoped. Either way, I didn't care. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I'd stood up for myself. And as we drove home, I started to wonder if this relationship was worth the price I'd been paying, not in money, but in trust, respect, and my own peace of mind.